am sure you appreciate the extremely grave nature of the crisis which is impending over you, and the vital necessity of rallying all you can to your standard. On you, primarily, rests whether Ireland shall remain an integral portion of this great empire, sharing in its glory, partaking of all its strength, benefiting by all its wealth, or whether, on the other hand, Ireland shall become the focus and the center of foreign intrigue and deadly conspiracy. Prepare, so that Home Rule will not come upon you as a thief in the night. Ulster will fight, and Ulster will be right. Ulster will fight, and Ulster will be right. These defiant words were spoken by Lord Randolph Churchill when he came to Ulster in February 1886 to address a monster meeting of Conservatives and Orangemen here in Belfast's Ulster Hall. Churchill was an English Conservative politician vehemently opposed to Gladstone, the Liberal Prime Minister, who proposed to introduce a bill that would give Home Rule to Ireland. British Conservatives had decided to ally themselves closely with the Protestant Orange Order. Indeed, Churchill himself had said that if Gladstone went for Home Rule, the Orange card was the one to play. Please God it may throw out the ace of trumps and not the two. The stakes were high in the game for Ireland. Gladstone had only come to power a month before, in alliance with 86 nationalist MPs of the Irish Parliamentary Party, led by Parnell. The nationalists hoped that a Home Rule bill would be passed. If that happened, Ireland would remain part of the British Empire, but the United Kingdom would be no more. Most of the Irish nationalists were Catholic by religion. Ulster Protestants dreaded the prospect of being ruled by a Catholic majority in a Dublin Parliament. Many Unionists claimed that Home Rule meant Rome Rule. Battle lines were being drawn that would affect the course of British and Irish politics for at least the next 100 years. Gladstone introduced the Home Rule Bill to the House of Commons on the 8th of April 1886. The House was so packed that members had to sit on the steps and even on each other's knees. The bill promised the Irish little more than control over the courts, the police and the civil service. Nevertheless, nationalists gave Gladstone their unreserved backing. In the end, however, Joseph Chamberlain and other Liberals deserted Gladstone. They feared that Home Rule could threaten the very existence of the empire by setting a bad example to the peoples of South Africa, India and elsewhere. The first Home Rule Bill was finally defeated on the 8th of June 1886. The issue may well have been settled in the Commons for the time being, but it certainly wasn't on the streets of Belfast. Serious rioting between Catholics and Protestants began in the poorer areas of Belfast a few days before the final defeat of the bill on June the 8th. Much of this rioting took place in the Brickfields, an area that lay between the Catholic Lower Falls and the Protestant Shankill Road. These rioters would use anything that came to hand in their battles, but the favoured weapon was the kidney paver, a kidney-shaped paving stone that was rooted up from the road by the women to hand to their menfolk to use as ammunition. Extra detachments of police were called in to try and prevent further outbreaks of trouble. They met with great hostility on the fervently loyalist Shankill Road. Driven back by a mob of some 2,000 rioters, 72 constables and their officers, 3 magistrates and 1 journalist took refuge in the small 2-storey Bowers Hill barracks. Then, after a salvo of paving stones destroyed the telegraph apparatus, the police fired wildly back into the crowd, killing 7 rioters. The besieged policemen had to stay where they were until a detachment of the Highland Light Infantry came to their rescue. The fact that many of the police constables were Southern Catholics convinced many Protestants that Gladstone's government was intent on punishing them for opposing Home Rule. While the local newspapers reported on the riots from their own particular political standpoints, all condemned the violence which was to continue all through the summer. By the middle of October, around 50 people, both Protestant and Catholic, had been killed. The failure of the first Home Rule Bill signalled a series of setbacks for Irish nationalism. Gladstone's Liberal government was forced to resign, and the Conservatives were now back in power in Westminster. In 1890, the Irish Parliamentary Party, was bitterly divided in a quarrel that centred on the personal life of Charles Stuart Parnell. Catherine, or Kitty O'Shea, was revealed to Parnell's lover. William O'Shea, a nationalist MP, was Catherine's husband, and in 1889 he brought a divorce action against Parnell. He offered no defence and subsequently married his beloved Kitty, but the scandal was to cost him the leadership of his party, because Gladstone declared he couldn't continue his alliance with the Irish nationalists unless Parnell resigned as leader. This Parnell refused to do. He was condemned by the Catholic Church. Then in December 1890, the Irish Parliamentary Party voted to depose him as leader. He again refused to accept this and died a year later at the age of 45, worn out and embittered by this vain attempt to hold on to power. In 1892, Gladstone again came to power and prepared to introduce a second Home Rule Bill. Seeing the continued threat, the Ulster Unionists organised their resistance. 6 years earlier, the Ulster Unionist cause had been seriously damaged by sectarian violence and rioting. But now a much more controlled response was prepared. The Unionists organised a demonstration to be held in a glass-roofed convention hall, specially constructed for the occasion here in the grounds of Belfast Botanic Gardens. The building covered 1 acre and was the largest which had ever been erected in Great Britain or Ireland for political purposes. The mood was sombre as the 12,000 delegates said prayers and sang Psalm 46. God is our refuge and our strength, in straits a present aid. Therefore, although the earth remove, we will not be afraid. The convention hall was covered in many of the normal loyalist mottos and emblems. It also sported Erin go Bragh, or Ireland Forever, a catch cry of the United Irishmen during the 1798 rebellion. But it was to an earlier revolution, the Protestant Revolution of King William, that the delegates looked to for their inspiration. It was this spirit that Liberal Unionist Thomas Sinclair caught in his speech. We are children of the Revolution of 1688, and cost what it may, we will have nothing to do with the Dublin Parliament. If it be ever set up, we simply ignore its existence. Its acts will be but as waste paper. If Mr. Gladstone, in mad wantonness, can induce Parliament to pass it into law, Ulstermen will be idiots, and worse than idiots, if they do not utterly repudiate it. No bill in the 19th century took up so much parliamentary time as Gladstone's second Home Rule Bill. There were 1,390 speeches, lasting in all 210 hours. The bill was passed in the House of Commons, but was then swiftly rejected in the Lords, the upper house. The members of the House of Lords weren't elected. They were rich and powerful men called aristocrats, who inherited their titles. There should have been a crisis when these unelected lords rejected the wishes of a majority of MPs from the House of Commons. But the truth was that many Liberals were now tired of the Home Rule issue, and the Nationalists were still bitterly divided. In 1895, the Conservatives were back in power, and for the next 10 years pursued a policy that aimed to kill Home Rule with kindness. This policy involved an ambitious programme of public works designed to encourage social and economic development. Roads were built as the Congested Districts Board gave special help to poor country areas along the impoverished Atlantic coastline. They promoted local crafts such as spinning and weaving and lace making, as shown in this class at Crawley. The board built harbours for fishermen, such as this one at Killybegs, Donegal. It was designed to encourage the fishing industry. The government proposed that landlords be bought out to make it possible for tenants to become owners of the farms they rented. Many landlords were eager to sell, and those that weren't were soon forced to. The farmers themselves found that their repayments, known as annuities, were often lower than their previous rents. Now Ireland, north and south, was covered in family farms, where not long before there had only been vast estate resentment. In other European countries, such dramatic change only took place through violence and bloodshed. But while this quiet revolution had solved the Irish land question almost at a stroke, it didn't kill the deep-seated feelings of Irish nationalism. In 1884, Michael Cusack formed the Gaelic Athletic Association, or GAA, The aim of the GAA was to revive and promote sports such as hurling and Gaelic football, which were regarded as being native to Ireland. Gaelic refers to the Gaels, the ancient Celtic people who settled in Ireland before the birth of Christ. They gave Ireland a rich and distinctive cultural tradition, as well as Gaelic, its native language. The GAA saw itself as part of a wider movement to create a sense of Irish national identity. Its members were forbidden to play foreign games such as rugby and cricket, which were regarded as being English in origin. The sportsmen of the GAA, like those working in other fields, were encouraging a move towards a degree of Irish independence. In the late 19th century, many Irish artists and illustrators started to work in a way that drew heavily on the style of ancient Celtic manuscripts, such as the Book of Kells. It shows how many Irish nationalists tended to look back to the Celtic past for their inspiration. Also, for many people, Gaelic culture was becoming associated exclusively with the Catholic community. Earlier in the 19th century, those who showed most interest in Ireland's ancient Gaelic culture had been Northern Protestants. Edward Bunting from Belfast spent most of his life travelling around Ireland collecting songs and airs, which he published in 1840 as the Ancient Music of Ireland. Samuel Ferguson was born in Belfast High Street, taught himself Irish and translated the epics of ancient Ireland into English. By the late 19th century, most Ulster Protestants thought of themselves as being British. Many now belonged to organisations such as the Orange Order, which had a religious and political identity very different from that of the rest of the Irish people. Few Unionists were interested in the activities of groups such as Conradh na Gaeilge, or the Gaelic League, which was set up in 1883. The object of the Gaelic League was to revive the Irish language, which had suffered a decline since the time of the famine. The Gaelic League was formed by three men. Douglas Hyde was the son of a Protestant clergyman in County Roscommon, who spoke Irish as his first language. Owen MacNeill from Glenarm, County Antrim, was a professor of history in University College, Dublin. Father Growney was professor of Irish at Maynooth College. The Irish language had gone into dramatic decline in the second half of the 19th century, as many Irish speakers from the poor areas in the west of Ireland had died or emigrated during or just after the Great Famine. Irish wasn't taught in the national schools, and many tended to prefer to speak English, which was the language used to carry out business. Parents too felt that their children should speak English to get on in Ireland, or in England, or even America if they were forced to emigrate. So while associated in people's minds with backwardness and poverty, many resented this, and in consequence sought to assert their native language. In 1900, John Redmond took over the leadership of the Irish Parliamentary Party. While Redmond was dedicated to achieving home rule for Ireland, he also supported the British Empire. He believed that Ireland's cause should be pursued through peaceful means in the Westminster Parliament. Arthur Griffith was a member of the Gaelic League and the Irish Republican Brotherhood. He founded a newspaper called the United Irishman, which promoted the nationalist cause. Sinn Féin was the name that he gave to the political party that he founded in 1905. Sinn Féin means ourselves alone in Irish. It was in Belfast, not in Dublin, that political battles were most intense. Here unionism was strongest, and here too were to be found the most dedicated nationalists. A group of men in Belfast belonged to the Irish Republican Brotherhood. These militant Northern Republicans included Dennis McCullough, a piano tuner from Belfast, and Bulmer Hobson, a Protestant journalist, formed the Dungannon Club in 1905. It was named in memory of the Dungannon Convention of 1782, when Protestant volunteers declared that England had no right to make laws for Ireland. Sean McDermott from County Leitrim was for a time a tram driver in Belfast. Thomas Clarke, who was brought up in Dungannon, had served 15 years in prison for taking part in a bombing campaign in England in the 1880s. Patrick McCartan was a medical student from Carrickmore in County Tyrone. Sir Roger Casement was a Protestant from Ballycastle, County Antrim, and a retired British diplomat. These men of the Irish Republican Brotherhood believed passionately in their cause, but in the early years of the 20th century, out-and-out rebellion against the Crown must have seemed like an impossibility for the vast majority of Irish people. In 1906, the Liberals won the general election. But with such a vast majority, they didn't need the help of the Irish nationalists. And for a while, the public's interest turned to a growing conflict between working people and their employers. In the early years of the 20th century, food prices began to rise, and workers all over Europe found it more and more difficult to make ends meet. In 1905, there was an attempted revolution in Russia. There were strikes in France, Spain, and Italy. In Britain, industry was brought to a halt by disputes. Then in 1907, a great strike began in Belfast. The dispute was between the Belfast dockers belonging to the Dockers Union and their employers belonging to the Shipping Federation. Jim Larkin, the Liverpool Irish organiser of the Dockers Union, was the man who led the workers. Thomas Gallagher, who owned the world's largest tobacco factory, was the leader of the employers. The dockers under Jim Larkin had been campaigning for some time for better pay and conditions. When the employers asked the workers to leave their trade union or be dismissed from their job, most workers refused. Then one morning in May 1907, as the dockers arrived for work as usual, they found the gates shut and locked against them. The employers had left instructions that the dockers were to be locked out and their jobs given to others, known as blacklegs. It was the beginning of a long and bitter strike. Catholic dockers joined with Protestant dockers, and soon they were supported by carters, firemen, sailors, coal heavers and linen workers. Hard-pressed policemen had to escort loads to and from the docks. But by July, the police were exhausted, and they too went on strike. Troops were brought onto the streets to prevent further disorder. There were confrontations and 2 people were killed, but by mid-September, the strike was over. But the 1907 dockers strike ended in an almost complete victory for the employers. Working men were quite simply not able to stay out of work month on end without any pay coming in to support their families. And the cooperation between Protestant and Catholic workers in Belfast didn't last long. It was the founder as the United Kingdom entered the most severe constitutional crisis of modern times. That crisis centred on the issue of Home Rule and the resistance of Ulster Protestants to the rule of a Dublin Parliament.